that. You know what I mean? They're secure in their marriages.
Because it's just like when people get divorced, they lose friends with, the
Yeah,
couples go
yeah,
one way
yeah.
and sometimes they lose that friendship.
And I think because we also, my late husband and I co-facilitated the married couples ministry in our church
Okay.
for 12 years. So we have friends, you know what I mean, real people who we did life with, you know what I mean, and some of them we did things with, you know what I mean, as
Right.
couples. So we never lost that relationship.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So at what point did you realize, because, there is that grieving process when you wake up the next day and when everybody's gone, because you go through that period, when they pass away, everybody comes in and,
Yeah.
you're making arrangements and plans. And then all of a sudden you wake up one day and you're it. There's no one around you.
Well, for me, it was like I knew that it was going to be that point.
Right.
I let them do a lot of visiting when he was in hospice, so that they could see him and spend. For me, afterwards, it was okay. I needed the solitude.
You did?
I
Okay.
needed that because I needed to process. Some people need a lot of people around them still. I didn't need that. I needed to figure out what this was all about. I needed rest too.
Right.
Because after a year and a half, doctor's appointments, and then it takes a toll when you have to watch someone go into eternity and hold their hand, and literally, it takes a lot out of you.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was a time that I needed just me and God to rest in Him. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So you just said something to figure it all out, though. And what is that? What does that look like? What did it look like to figure it all out?
For me, it meant just to be still, to rest. For me, it meant closure in terms of going home, trying to organize his things, which the first month I did well. Then 3 years later, I still had things. My room still looked like he was coming home.
Wow. So
It's like it's almost like I got stuck. And then one day I decided I gotta move forward.
So you hadn't let go.
I hadn't let go. So 3 years later, I decided, something clicked and said, you gotta let go. You gotta get rid of all his stuff because right now, he's still running things. There's no room for you to move forward.
What was that? Because that's 3 years. What was that period like, though?
That period was, it's moving around, just me going.
Were you in denial?
I don't know if I was in denial as much as didn't want to deal with it.
Okay.
Sometimes when you don't want to deal with something, you put it on a shelf and you move forward and ignore it.
Okay.
Knowing that I don't know if you know what I mean? You're just, when you don't want to do something, you just put it aside.
Yeah, but emotionally you had to.
Emotionally, I didn't, it was too much to do.
That's what, yeah.
Emotionally, I think emotionally it was a drain. But somehow I began to talk to God about this. I said, give me the strength. And within a week's time, everything was cleared out.
Okay.
And it was just, he had so much stuff. So much stuff he had accumulated, you know what I mean? And I had to, I had a brother, my brother-in-law, I called him up. He came from North Carolina, picked up this collection of albums. But my late husband had a collection of 45s, all kind of albums. And I says, if you want them, you can come get them. And actually, he called me and asked if he could have them. And I says, you know what? Whenever you can have them, come get them. Right. I wasn't gonna, I didn't need it. He wanted it. It's just amazing collection that was passed down from his father. I mean, you name it, he had the original Motown.
Yeah.
All those originals. And so I began to get rid of all his stuff.
So it was 3 years, though.
It took me 3 years to finally clear it out.
So when you
but I think I hadn't let him go. I had finally
that's where I was going.
I hadn't let him go.
Yeah.
I didn't want to deal completely with letting him go. The first month I said, okay, I'm going to do this. I gave away a lot of things. Then there was a lot of stuff that hadn't. And by year 3, it's just I gotta just start all over with everything.
Yeah.
I said, because right now you look like you're still coming home, shoes out.
Shoes out. So he was in your mind, and that's a great point you just made.
Yeah.
So in essence, although he wasn't there, you found comfort.
Comfort.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I did it too. You know, people would, if I was having something done to the house, it was like, okay, maybe that's good to keep a pair of shoes out so they
Yeah.
could
So
think.
people don't, well, especially when you live by yourself.
Right,
that,
right.
that
And
could-
that's part of getting adjusted.
Right.
Now I'm okay.
So you've moved on.
I've moved on in
Yeah.
terms of allowing him to rest in peace.
Right.
Because
And you're okay now that you've let it, I mean, you.
oh, yeah, I had to, yeah. In order for me to be the whole person, meaning that, you know, I need to be for myself and for my son and grandchildren, I had to let him go. My son, I think he has let it, because I let it go, he's let him go.
Yeah.
Now, we've all come to a better space and place,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it takes time. And some people I know, they've moved on, you know. Year one, they're gone. They're like,
Well, people process it differently.
differently, yeah. But
people
for
grieve differently.
yeah,
People
and-
process
and-
it differently.
Yeah, and that's okay, you know. But for me, it just took some time.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful that I took my time and not rushed. And I'm in a great space now.
Yeah. So do people, do you talk to other women or other folks and help them through the grieving process?
I do. You know, when women have lost a loved one they've lost, I definitely do talk to them and coach them. And you know, I just had a situation earlier today.
Okay.
Someone just broke down, and I just told her, take your time, you know, and just really let her know that one day at a time. You
Yeah.
know, without telling her that I had lost my husband. She didn't need to know that. She needed to deal with what was going on with her.
Her grieving.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is so good that you can help. Because I don't know, like if people really talk about it, you know?
So I think the older women, they just don't date anymore. They shove it down and they move on.
Right.
That's what I've seen with older women.
Right. But do people, like when my mom passed, when I came back to Chicago, I don't know if I talked about it at all.
Some people don't.
Yeah.
They don't. It's okay, and because maybe it's too painful.
Yeah.
What I do know, it's painful for some people. So when you don't want to talk about something and it brings up too many emotions, you know what I mean? For
Yeah.
me, I probably talked too much about them, you know what I mean? But then I had a happy story.
Right.
It's,
yeah.
it was a happy marriage, it was a happy life. And I don't think that, and that's why when we write the obituary, it leaves his memories to cherish.
Right.
His wife, children, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And-
But to your point, you were independent anyway. I mean, so, you said even now you'll book a trip and go travel by yourself. And some people are not that independent. They don't have the courage, to go and travel by themselves.
Yeah.
Some people they become stuck.
Yeah.
And you said you were for a while.
Yeah, well, I still, was stuck with his things, but I was
Right.
still moving and going places and doing. But when I came home, I had the comfort of his stuff still around me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I was.
Well, to your point, you just weren't ready to let go yet.
Right,
I mean,
right.
although you knew he was gone.
Right,
Right. You weren't ready to let go.
right. Not
Yeah.
completely, right. But I was still going places, enjoying life, and you know what I mean? But when I wasn't that part, I was saying, still got to keep this part. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah. So did you and your husband even have a chance to talk about what's next for you after he was gone? Was that part of the,
We did. He told me, he says, I pray that the Lord will bless you real, real good. And he would say that over and over. He said, because you've been so good to me.
Yeah.
You've made my life just so much better. You came, he would just, tell me how much he's going to miss me and vice versa. So we had those conversations about me moving forward and doing things and enjoying, you know.
So it's almost like you were um, have I don't know if getting permission, but you had his blessings.
I had his
blessings, so that
Yes.
you know if you move on, that's okay as long as you are
Blessed.
blessed.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I do believe I have a hedge of protection. There's prayers that he laid up and prayed, before, you know what I mean?
Right.
And that's why there's certain things that can't get by me because he's got this hedge.
And plus he prepared you.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you know, and you said that you know the qualities of a good man. So you already had a good man. You know what the
Yes.
qualities are.
Yeah.
So you don't have to question.
Right,
You
right.
know.
The stakes are high, right?
Yeah. And there are people, because again, grieving, people deal with it differently. There are people who don't want to be by themselves, who can't stand being
Yeah.
by themselves, and sometimes may end up in a relationship that they may not be as blessed because they're
Yeah.
making the decision.
Based on, yeah. And unfortunately, I always say, when you are grieving, it's not a time to make major decisions.
Right.
I didn't sell my home because that would have been a major decision. There's just certain major things I delayed for a while of doing
Yeah.
because I realized when grief comes in, you're not all there. You cannot make major decisions when you are grieving. You know what I mean? And
So
people,
did you know, I mean, now that's a great point. Let's talk about that, because for someone that may be listening that may have just lost a loved one, and they may be thinking they don't know how to go forward. You know, what am I going to do next? They may be angry.
Yeah.
They may be in denial. What do you say?
I would say take one day at a time. Every day is a new day. Go through the processes, all 7 of those stages,
Yeah.
whatever that might be.
Right.
You know, you need to go through them, and then that's when real healing comes through.
Yeah.
You might not go through them where they're major. You know, you may get angry for a moment, for a few times, but you may cry a lot. Everybody's different.
Right.
But if you go through all those, I guarantee you've gone through the process,
Right.
which will guarantee healing at some point.
So that's a good point. Recognize that grieving is a process.
It is.
And
And you can't go through it fast and quit. Some people think they can, but it takes time with anything, especially when it's a loved one.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if you don't, it shows up later. I've seen people who've made decisions only later to regret. You know, like you said, some people don't want to be by themselves.
Right.
Well, then when they're done with the grieving, the person they're now with and married to is no good for them.
Right.
Because it was just, they wake up and they say, oh, I can see clearly now, but you're not who I, so that is not the time to make major decisions. Not to move, not to get married, certain things until you have gone through the process.
And I kind of looked them up. So one of them is shock and denial. So a lot of folks are in denial, and they just, because they can't process it at that time.
Right.
And maybe because of the fear too. It's like, what am I going to do without you? What's next for me?
Yeah.
Yeah. And another one is pain and guilt. You feel guilty. And of course the pain from losing a loved one.
Yeah.
And anger, and start bargaining. Well, God, if you let him stay, or if you do this, if you let him stay a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And depression, reflection, and loneliness. That's a huge one.
Yes.
Because some people do become depressed.
Yes.
They feel that they can't go on.
Right.
Or some people don't want to go on either.
Right. Yes. And you have those moments where you feel like it's a lot, but you realize you have to keep the big picture in front of you.
Yeah.
And one day at a time, and realize what you have to live for.
How did loneliness show up for you after 24 years?
Oh my goodness.
Because that's
Yes.
huge. Depression,
Yeah.
reflection, and even reflection. Reflection, well, though, because that's the memories, and
Yes.
hopefully you hold on to those.
Yes.
But what about loneliness? How did that show up? What was?
It showed up key. It was a big thing for me, because there are many times where I just cried out to God, and He just those moments, he would just take me and put a blanket of, a love and peace around me, during
Yeah.
those moments. And so reading, getting stronger in the Word, spending time with my grandchildren and my, mom and, other family, and friends, that's what got me through.
Yeah.
And keeping busy and serving others. And
Yeah.
that will take your mind off you. And you know what I mean? Because you can't be lonely if you're moving and thinking and helping other people.
Yeah, it takes your mind off yourself.
Absolutely. So I had to stay really active and busy
Yeah.
and travel and see, and that got me through. You know how certain things will get you through
Yeah.
a season.
Yeah.
And now and every human being gets lonely, and I always tell people that I don't know anybody who didn't.
Well, some people are in relationships and are lonely.
Right, I was
Some
going to
people
say,
are married and
right,
lonely,
right, exactly. Jesus got lonely, you know what I mean? And we're going to get lonely, but you don't stay that way. And that's when you find yourself in that space, you have to get up and go pour into somebody else.
Yeah, that's a great point. And then the other one is upward turn. So you said you recognize, but had you made the turn before those 3 years, and the 3 years was at the point where you're saying, okay, this is it, when you start clearing things out or changing?
Yeah.
Had you made the turn before those 3 years?
I think I had. I just had to do. You know how there's certain things you just needed strength. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Your mind. You know how I think we talked about you doing something, you had to complete something. You had already done it in your mind.
Right,
It's
yes.
just putting it down on paper.
Right.
It was just me. I had to muster up the strength to do it. And when I got going,
That was it?
it was on.
Because it was time. So
It
how
was-
did you feel, though? You come home the
I-
next day, the shoes are no longer there?
You know what? I slept well. I began to sleep I thought I was sleeping good, but I wasn't. It was so much peace. It was, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I felt just a relief because I finally let him go.
I was going to say, because you knew then it was time
It was
to let him
time.
go. Yeah. So that he could rest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
If you think of it that way,
Yeah.
you're holding, even though he's not there, but because he's very present in the
Yes.
house,
Yeah.
with his clothing and everything else, you're holding him there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I finally let him go, and occasionally if I'm in the car doing something, he'll show. Like you said, your mother.
When you go to the west side, for sure he shows up.
Right.
So my baby's going to the west side.
Right.
Yes.
And even today, as I was coming in, so I was thinking he would be so proud of me talking about him, and
Yeah.
you know what I mean. And he hasn't been forgotten, and he won't be
Do
forgotten.
you still have the pictures up, in the house?
Oh, absolutely, with
Yeah.
him and me and my son together, and him and the grandchildren, because he did get to meet the two grandchildren.
Okay.
We have three, but he got to meet the first two. So, yeah.
So, what are you doing now? What's up with you
Well,
now? It's been
I-
7 years.
I know, 7 years later.
So what's up now for
I
you?
am still active with the American Cancer Society on their board now. Back then, 7 years ago, I wasn't on the board, but I was active with them, you know. Been active with the Barbara Bates Foundation and doing a little bit
Thank God for that, because that's how we met.
Yeah,
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And her walks and things like that, and working full time in the mammography department, and
That's great.
and I was always the type of wife where I didn't really have to work. He was always kept it like that, and I think about even now, he would be so tickled because I always say if I went back to work, it would have to be something I would do for free. And I was doing this for free.
But you enjoy doing you're helping.
This is helping. This
Yeah.
is more of a helping role. And so that's what I do, my
Yeah.
full time, and then spending time with the grandchildren, traveling, and whatever in my church, and just really enjoying life and taking one day at a time.
Yeah. I like the way you talked about your faith, and talking to God. And that played a big role in how you were able to go forward.
Yes.
Yeah. And some people, don't have a church home.
Yeah.
And some people may not have that type of relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine being able to go forward if you didn't have that type of faith and that type of relationship with God?
Oh, it would have been very difficult. very challenging, because that's what sustained me during it all. Having to talk to God and having to recall the word.
Yeah.
You know, when he passed away, and I realized to be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord, and that's what we're all striving for.
Yes.
And so those things would come back, you know, to remind me, you know, and even as he laid in his bed and I would watch him look up and he was transitioning, and I felt like that when the Bible talks about a witness, a cloud. It was his relatives, mom and dad, and people calling him, you know what I mean? So as he's here on earth, but yet he's transitioning and he's looking up. And so, we, you know, you get to witness all that as you see someone leave. But my faith kept me. And, you know, when we talk about faith and we talk about losing a loved one, the morning he passed away, I read to him Psalms. And I believe, I didn't know he was going to pass. I did not know when he was going to pass, but it was getting close.
Right.
Because the nurse would say, well, what's taking him so long? Doctors were coming in and said, well, who's he waiting on? What's he waiting on? You know what I mean?
Really? Is that?
And I told him.
How did you handle that?
And I said,
How did you handle
I
that?
said, he's waiting on God.
Yes.
You know?
You said, how dare you? Right.
Because they said,
It's not his time yet.
They thought that he would have been gone like 3 or 4 days. They had came in one day and said he'll probably be gone today. Well, he outlived them, and you know what I mean, that time.
Defiant,
Yeah,
okay.
3 or 4 days later he left. But he did, and the nurse said, I guess he's just a man that does everything on his timetable. I said, no, he's being led by God. God is not ready for him to come yet.
Yeah.
You know, so it's just getting them to understand. It's not about, he can't will himself on out of here.
Right.
He didn't get to will himself in here, in the world. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it was just interesting.
Yeah, and you know, you talk about faith and talk about being a Christian. It's also, and it's not easy when you lose a loved one, but it's more understandable because you don't truly feel that this is the end.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
You truly feel that I'll see him on the other side because they're just transitioning.
Yes.
Yeah, so that helps.
Absolutely.
You know, versus I am never going to see. And then the other thing too, having faith and understanding the Bible, you understand this is a season.
Yes.
The people in your lives are just for a season. And that's why I made the statement earlier about 24 years was really short, wasn't it? I mean, 24 years is 24 years is a long time, but when you put it in context
it's very short. You know, I felt like, okay, I feel like we just had really started to get, you know, to that point. Now, the grandchildren are coming now. This is now the next season. We'll get to watch them grow up, you know what I mean?
Right.
And it was just cut off. Just didn't see it coming because, as I mentioned to you, he was such a healthy male, had a lot on his plate, worked full-time in corporate America, yet did ministry, you know what I mean, pastored on the Navy base as well.
You're making a difference, yeah.
Yeah, so he not only in 4 walls of the church, but outside, you know, Sundays, a lot of Sundays at the Great Lakes Navy base on, you know, touching hundreds of lives, if not thousands at a time, new recruits. So he did a lot, you know what I mean? When I think about, you know, he and I, when we met, you know, that had God given us a peek into the future, I would have said, because I had ran away from not wanting to be a pastor's wife. Someone had, you know, and then later on,
You are the pastor's wife. Obviously, that's what.
And I thought I was going to not have to, you know, be one. And this young man was truly, I mean, he was a pastor. He had his own church at a young age, and he.
You ran from him.
Yeah, I ran.
And ran right into your husband's hands and became a pastor's wife.
So it was interesting. I'm like, okay, couldn't run from this one. I'm married now, you know.
So will you get married again?
If that's God's will, you know, I always tell people I'm open to whatever God's will is for my life. I enjoyed being married. I think that I didn't get the choice to be a widow, so I don't get a choice to be married again, right?
Somebody may be listening. Somebody who's watching this is listening. Okay, pastor's wife, note to self. You know, she doesn't mind. She's willing to be married again. Note to self. She likes to travel, note to self. She's gorgeous, note to self. So somebody may be watching and making all these notes to self, just so you know. Just so you know.
You know, I'm always like this. This is a way I believe what's meant for you, you're going to get it. You can't run a person away who's supposed to be a part of your purpose and plan.
Right.
You can't derail it. You can, but you can't.
Right, because
You know
you
what I-
ran from one right
Right.
into the arms of the other.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So so to your answer is whatever God plan is for me, I'm in agreement with.
Right. You know, this has been such a great conversation because, like I said, when my mom passed, I don't know if I really had this conversation.
Really?
Yeah, I grieved though. I did.
Okay.
I grieved. It was a very, very difficult time. And like I said, I couldn't even talk about her for about 6 months without tearing up. And it's funny because one day my sister called me and she said, you know, this is the first time that you've talked about Mom without having that emotion in your voice. And that was the end of October. My mom passed away the beginning of February of that year. So I was grieving and didn't know it.
Yeah.
How it was showing up.
Yeah.
It was showing up to my sister. And like I said, a year or so ago, out there by the lakefront and wishing that she was here, and that little voice saying, you were so selfish because she was here so long for you. And I started thinking of it differently.
Yes.
But it's something, again, that we're all going to have to go through, and we process it differently.
Absolutely.
But I think understanding that it is a process and there are different stages, and if anyone who's out there listening that may be going through something right now, understanding that this is a season too, and this too shall pass.
Absolutely. And you know, I would tell anybody, cry. Cry. If you have to cry every day, cry. You know, there were moments where I would cry, wipe my tears, and go into wherever I was going. But I
Put
got
your lipstick on and go, right?
Yes, but I had to keep moving because I realized if you don't, something dies in you.
Yeah.
So for me, it was more, this is what I needed, to keep moving. I cried, and there were moments where I thought, okay, I'm good now. Then all of a sudden, something would happen, and I would just break down and just, you know what I mean? And you would never see me cry out in public.
Right.
But it was those times at home where there would just be something, probably because he would always say, well, honey, you sit down. Let me get that for you.
Yeah.
And then one day I said, you set me up. Where are you now when I need a glass of water?
But you would be, but that's good too. So not only that, it's okay to cry, but it's okay because you have to work through the process of letting them go.
Yeah.
But to still have that conversation, and that's what you hold on to are the memories.
Yes. And I would just get so tickled. Okay, where are you now? I'd like a glass of water.
Yeah.
Because he would say, sit down, honey, I'll get it for you. You know what I mean? He was just that type of person where he was a true servant. I didn't have to worry about a lot of things, but then I was probably about 25 pounds heavier.
Because he was taking care of everything. So that's the other thing. Now all of a sudden, you know, it's one thing that when you have a husband or a partner and you get used to each other and look in a certain way, and now all of a sudden you're a single woman again.
Yeah.
You know, so now you have to start looking at yourself differently, right?
I don't know. But, you know, even though I was 25 pounds heavier, I still always looked nice because I liked.
But you're not 25 pounds heavier now.
No, I'm not because I'm moving more. I forgot what happened.
I'm just saying, you're not 25 pounds. But I'm just saying you do. At what point did you start thinking of yourself as a single woman again?
Well, it took a while.
Yeah.
It took a while because when you've been married for so long, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It took a while to click. Someone said, well, why are you still wearing rings? Don't you know that you should keep your hands bare now?
How long before you took them off?
Probably not too long, but it was just like even when I would put on a ring, they would say no.
Well, Ms. Pearl, thank you so much for coming on the Eva Kennedy Show. Didn't that hour go by fast?
It did. Are we done taping?
Yes,
Oh,
I know, but I appreciate you coming on.
I hope I didn't talk too much.
Just to talk to the audience a little bit, thank you so much for joining the Eva Kennedy Show. You know, loss of a loved one, it's unfortunate, but we're all going to experience at some point. It's a process, and take your time. Just take your time. Thank you for joining the Eva Kennedy Show. Bye.